The day I realized my parents had been letting themselves into my apartment wasn't the day my life broke apart. It was the day I finally understood something far worse. They had never believed it belonged to me in the first place. At first, the signs were small. Too small to accuse anyone. Too small to sound sane if I said them out loud. I'd come home from work and notice the kitchen light glowing softly, even though I always turned it off before leaving. A cabinet door slightly open. A mug sitting in the sink that I didn't remember using. Little things, forgettable things. Except they kept happening. And slowly, quietly, the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary started feeling like a stage someone else walked through when I wasn't there. My name is Hannah Brooks, and when this story happened, I was 30 years old living in Austin, Texas. It was the first apartment I ever rented completely on my own, not with roommates, not under someone else's lease. Mine, a small one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older brick building just off South Lamar Boulevard. The balcony overlooked a line of oak trees and a busy street where food trucks parked in the evenings. It wasn't fancy, but when I moved in, it felt like freedom. I bought dishes from Target, hung fairy lights along the windows, arranged my books exactly the way I like them. For the first time in my life, every object around me existed because I chose it. That mattered more than I can explain, because growing up in my parents' house, nothing had ever truly belonged to me. Not my space, not my time, not even my thoughts. My mother, Diane Brooks, had a habit of entering rooms like doors were only suggestions. My bedroom door might as well have been made of paper. She'd walk in without knocking, humming softly like everything was normal. Sometimes she'd sit on my bed. Sometimes she'd wander around the room. But most of the time, she searched. Journals, drawers, backpacks. She called it parenting. I called it surveillance. If I ever protested, she'd sigh like I had just broken her heart. Hannah, she'd say gently, I'm your mother. I just want to make sure you're okay. That phrase followed me my entire life. I just want to make sure you're okay. My father, Michael, never challenged her. He preferred peace over confrontation. If Mom crossed a line, Dad would shrug and say something like, you know how your mother worries. Then he'd change the subject. Meanwhile, my younger brother Ethan lived under a completely different set of rules. Ethan was 3 years younger than me and somehow existed in a bubble where mistakes were learning experiences. His messy room was called creativity. His late nights were independence. His attitude was personality. But if I locked my door, that meant I was hiding something. By the time I graduated college, I had learned something very important. Privacy wasn't something my parents believed in. So when I moved to Austin for my marketing job, I thought I had finally escaped that system. And for a little while, I had. The first few months in my apartment were quiet, beautifully quiet. I would wake up on Saturday mornings and drink coffee on the balcony. Sometimes I left dishes in the sink overnight. Sometimes I stayed up until 2 a.m. watching terrible reality TV. No one commented. No one monitored. No one rearranged my life. For the first time, my world felt like it had edges that belonged only to me. Then one evening, my mother showed up with groceries. She knocked cheerfully like she was visiting a college dorm. Honey, I was in the neighborhood. That was a lie. My parents lived 3 hours away in Dallas, but she stood there smiling with reusable grocery bags filled with food. I figured you probably haven't been eating real meals. I should have known then. That moment should have warned me. But old habits run deep, so I let her in. She immediately tied on an apron she'd brought with her from her purse and started cooking in my kitchen like she'd been waiting weeks for permission. My dad arrived half an hour later carrying a 6-pack of beer. We just wanted to see where our girl lives. They stayed 3 hours. Mom reorganized my refrigerator. Dad examined my mail on the counter. When they left, I convinced myself it was just a typical parent visit. But the small things started after that. The tiny details that made my stomach twist. One night I came home and my throw blanket was folded differently. Another time my spice rack had been reorganized. My laundry hamper contained clothes I didn't remember wearing. At first, I blamed myself. Stress. Work. Maybe I was forgetting things. But then one afternoon, I came home early and I saw something that made my entire body go cold. A pair of shoes sat beside my couch. They weren't mine. They were my mother's. That was the moment the quiet suspicion finally snapped into something undeniable. Someone had been inside my apartment. And deep down, I already knew exactly who it was. I called my mom immediately. She answered on the first ring. Hannah, sweetheart. Mom, I said slowly, have you been inside my apartment when I'm not home? There was a pause, then a soft laugh. Oh, honey, you sound stressed. Mom, another pause. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. The words hit me like a memory from childhood. You used your key? Oh, relax, she said said lightly. Your landlord let me in. I told him I hadn't heard from you in a few days. I gripped the counter. You lied to get into my apartment? Hannah, she sighed, don't make this dramatic. My chest tightened. You went through my home. I cleaned a little, she said defensively. Then she added the sentence that told me everything I needed to know. You should be grateful someone is looking out for you. That night, I sat on the floor of my living room staring at the walls. Suddenly, every strange detail made sense. The lights, the moved dishes, the reorganized fridge, the missing food. They hadn't visited once. They had been visiting whenever they wanted, and I had never even known. But the worst part, they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. To them, this was love. To me, it felt like my life had been quietly taken back. And deep down, a terrifying thought started forming. If I didn't stop them soon, they would never stop coming. After the phone call with my mother, I tried to convince myself it wasn't as bad as it sounded, that maybe she had only come once, maybe twice. Maybe I was overreacting. People with normal families always say things like that. They assume every parent respects limits. They assume concern and control are the same thing. But something inside me knew better, because the next few weeks started revealing a pattern that made my stomach twist every time I unlocked my apartment door. The first thing I noticed was the food. I would buy groceries on Sunday. By Wednesday, half of them were gone. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was stress eating without realizing. But then I started paying attention. I bought a pack of yogurt cups and counted them. 6. 2 days later, there were 4. Except I had only eaten 1. I told myself it was nothing. Until I came home one evening and found the refrigerator completely reorganized. Not just tidied. Rearranged in the exact same way my mother used to organize things when I lived at home. Vegetables at the top. Dairy in the middle. Snacks hidden in the back like contraband. My frozen pizzas were gone. In their place sat 3 mason jars filled with homemade soup. Each jar had a sticky note. Eat something healthy. Mom. I stood there staring at them for a long time. The cold air from the fridge spilling across my arms. That was when the truth started creeping in. She hadn't just visited once. She had been inside my apartment multiple times. Maybe many times. And suddenly, every tiny, odd moment over the past month started clicking together like pieces of a puzzle I had been refusing to see. My blanket folded differently. My couch cushions moved. My bathroom towels replaced with ones from my parents' house. My life was being quietly adjusted when I wasn't around. Managed, corrected, edited. The realization made my skin crawl. But things didn't stop there, because then Ethan got involved. I noticed it the following Friday. I came home from work, dropped my purse on the counter, and walked into the living room, and immediately froze. A video game controller sat on my coffee table. I didn't own a gaming console, but someone had plugged one into my TV. And it was still warm, like someone had just been using it. My chest tightened. I walked around the apartment slowly. Every room. Kitchen. Bedroom. Bathroom. Empty. But there were signs everywhere. An empty soda can in the sink. A bag of chips on the couch. A pair of socks on the floor. Men's socks. I picked them up slowly. They looked familiar. Then it hit me. They were Ethan's. I called him immediately. He answered with his usual careless tone. Hey, Hannah, were you in my apartment today? A pause. Then he chuckled. Oh, yeah. My stomach dropped. You gave Ethan a key? Well, I thought it might help you, she said defensively. What if you lock yourself out? You lied to my landlord? Hannah? You gave my brother access to my home. He's family. That word. Family. The universal excuse for everything. You can't just come into my apartment whenever you want. We're helping you, she insisted. You're controlling me. Silence. Then she said something that sent a chill through my entire body. You're being ungrateful. The call ended shortly after that, but the situation only got worse. 2 weeks later, something happened that finally pushed me over the edge. I came home from work exhausted. It had been a long day at the marketing firm where I worked. All I wanted was a quiet evening. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately noticed something wrong. My laptop was open. I always closed it before leaving. Always. I walked slowly toward the coffee table. The screen glowed softly, and what I saw there made my stomach twist. One of my work documents was open, a confidential campaign proposal. But someone had been scrolling through it. The cursor sat halfway down the page, like whoever had been reading got bored and stopped. My chest tightened. I clicked the browser. Multiple tabs were open. Tabs I hadn't used. Online shopping, social media, news articles. Someone had been casually browsing the internet on my computer, inside my apartment. While I was gone, I didn't even bother calling Ethan. I already knew the answer. Instead, I called my mom. She answered immediately. "Hannah, did you come into my apartment today?" "Oh, honey, did you touch my laptop?" A pause, then a familiar sigh. "I was checking something." "You were checking something? You work so much," she said gently. "I was worried you might be overwhelmed. You read my work files. I was just curious what you're doing at that job of yours." My hands started shaking. "That's confidential." Well, how was I supposed to know that? Because it's my life, my career, my apartment, my privacy. But she kept talking like none of that mattered. "You hide too much from us, Hannah." The words echoed through my head. Hide too much, like privacy was some kind of offense. I hung up without responding. Then I sat on the floor of my living room, just staring at the wall. Every memory from childhood started flooding back. Mom reading my diary, Mom checking my phone, Mom opening letters addressed to me. Back then, she had always used the same justification. "I'm your mother." Now I was 30 years old, and she was still saying the same thing. Except this time, it wasn't my childhood bedroom. It was my home. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I couldn't concentrate at work. My chest felt tight all day, like my entire life had invisible fingerprints on it. Around lunchtime, I did something I had never done before. I booked a therapy appointment. The office was small and quiet. Soft lighting. A bookshelf filled with psychology books. The therapist introduced herself as Dr. Laura Bennett. She listened carefully as I explained everything. My childhood. The apartment. The keys. The laptop. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly and asked a question that stopped me cold. "Hannah, do you feel safe in your own home?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out, because for the first time I realized something terrifying. I didn't. Dr. Bennett nodded slowly. "What you're describing," she said gently, "is a pattern of boundary violations." The phrase sounded clinical, but the meaning hit me like a wave. "They're your parents," I said quietly. "That doesn't change the impact." I stared at the carpet. "They say they're helping. Control often disguises itself as help," she said softly. Her next sentence changed everything. "You deserve a space where no one enters without permission." Simple words. But they felt revolutionary, because suddenly a thought started forming. A thought I had never allowed myself to consider before. What if the only way to stop them was to disappear completely? The thought didn't arrive dramatically. There was no lightning bolt moment, no sudden declaration of independence. It came quietly, the way most life-changing decisions do. As I walked out of Dr. Bennett's office that afternoon, the warm Austin sun hit my face and one sentence kept repeating in my head. "You deserve a space where no one enters without permission." I had lived 30 years without that. 30 years of doors that never meant anything. 30 years of privacy treated like a betrayal. And suddenly the truth was painfully clear. Talking wouldn't fix this. It never had. Every boundary I had ever tried to set with my parents ended the same way. They stepped over it, then explained why it wasn't really a boundary at all. If I wanted my life back, I couldn't negotiate. I had to remove the opportunity entirely. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, the same laptop my mother had casually browsed like it was a public computer. For a few minutes, I just stared at the screen, my hands resting on the keyboard. Part of me felt ridiculous. Running away from my own parents parents sounded dramatic, childish. But another part of me, the quiet, exhausted part that had been ignored my whole life, whispered something different. This isn't running. This is protecting yourself. So I opened a new tab and typed 4 words into the search bar. Secure apartment buildings. Austin. Dozens of listings appeared instantly. High-rise condos downtown. Gated complexes with private parking garages. Buildings with keycard entry. Security desks. Cameras in every hallway. Places designed specifically to keep unwanted people out. I clicked through them slowly, studying each detail like someone learning a new language. For most people, security systems were just features. For me, they felt like freedom. One building caught my attention almost immediately. A modern apartment tower near the river. Tall glass windows. Controlled elevator access. 24-hour lobby staff. No one could enter the residential floors without a keycard. No exceptions. Not even convincing lies. I stared at the listing for a long time. Then I scheduled a tour for the next morning. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Ethan. Not even my coworkers. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. If my mother found out I was planning to move, she would talk me out of it. Not with anger. Not with threats. She would do it the way she always had. With guilt. The next morning, I drove downtown before work. The building stood 12 stories tall. Glass reflecting the morning sunlight like a mirror. Inside, the lobby felt calm and quiet. A receptionist greeted me from behind a marble desk. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "I'm here for a tour," I said. She smiled warmly and called the leasing agent. A few minutes later, a man named Carlos appeared and led me toward the elevators. "You'll notice," he said as we walked, "the elevator requires a resident key card before it moves." He demonstrated by tapping a sleek black card against a small panel. The elevator chimed softly. "That prevents anyone from wandering the building." My chest tightened slightly. Good. Very good. The apartment he showed me was on the 9th floor. A corner unit. Large windows. Simple hardwood floors. Nothing extravagant. But when he opened the door and stepped aside, something strange happened. The silence inside the apartment felt different. Still. Protected. Like the walls themselves understood the concept of boundaries. I walked slowly through the space. The living room. The kitchen. The bedroom. Every door had sturdy locks. The balcony door required a separate key. And most importantly, the building itself controlled entry. No landlord could casually unlock the door because someone claimed to be worried. No family member could sweet-talk their way inside. I stood by the window looking out over the city. And for the first time since moving to Austin, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Safety. Carlos smiled. "So what do you think?" I didn't hesitate. "I'll take it." He blinked in mild surprise. Most people toured multiple places, compared prices, thought about it for days. But I had already spent 30 years thinking about it. We signed the lease that afternoon. The earliest move-in date was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. That meant 3 more weeks of pretending everything was normal, 3 more weeks of my family believing they still had access to my life, and then I would disappear. But I couldn't move alone. Not secretly. Not quickly. So that night I called the only 2 people I trusted completely, my best friend Rachel and her boyfriend Marcus. We met at a quiet taco place after work. I explained everything. The keys, the apartment visits, the laptop, the therapy session. Rachel's eyes grew wider with every detail. "Wait," she said slowly. "Your mom just lets herself into your apartment?" "Yes." "And your brother hangs out there when you're not home?" "Apparently." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "That's insane." I sighed. "I need to move without them knowing." Rachel leaned forward immediately. "We'll help." "Really?" "Of course," she said. "Honestly, Hannah, I'm shocked you didn't do this sooner." Marcus nodded. "We can move everything overnight." The plan started forming right there at the table. Quiet, simple, fast. We would pack gradually over the next few weeks. Nothing obvious, just small boxes hidden in my closet. Then on moving night, we would load everything into Marcus's truck. Late, after midnight, when most of the building was asleep. By morning, my apartment would be empty, and my parents would have no idea where I went. The idea made my heart race. Part fear, part excitement, but mostly relief. For the first time in my life, I was making a decision my parents couldn't interfere with. The next 3 weeks felt strange. I started noticing things differently. Every time I came home, I looked around carefully, checking for signs of intrusion. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't. But the feeling never went away. The sense that someone else believed they had ownership over my space. One evening, I found my spice rack rearranged again. Another time, Ethan left an empty pizza box in the trash. Each discovery only strengthened my resolve, because soon, none of this would matter anymore. Finally, moving day arrived. Or rather, moving night. Rachel and Marcus showed up at my apartment at 11:45 p.m. wearing hoodies and gloves like we were about to commit a crime. Marcus grinned. "All right, he whispered dramatically. Operation Disappear. Rachel laughed quietly. Tell me again why we're whispering. Because if my parents show up, I said softly, I might lose the courage to leave. That shut everyone up. We packed quickly. Boxes stacked in the hallway, clothes, books, kitchen supplies, everything that belonged to me. But I left certain things behind. The mug my mom gave me, the blanket she insisted I keep, a framed photo my dad once said would make the apartment feel like home. I didn't want reminders. I didn't want objects they could claim ownership over. At 2:15 a.m., Marcus's truck was full. We took one final look around the apartment. It felt strange seeing it empty, like a chapter closing quietly. I locked the door, then did one last thing. From my purse, I pulled out the spare key my mother loved to wave around like a trophy. I slipped it into an envelope addressed to the landlord. No explanation, no forwarding address, just the key. When we reached my new building downtown, the night receptionist greeted us politely. I handed over my ID. She gave me my key card and said something simple that felt strangely powerful. Welcome home, Ms. Brooks. The elevator carried us to the 9th floor. I stepped inside my new apartment. Rachel flipped on the lights. Boxes everywhere. Furniture waiting to be arranged. A completely blank space. Mine. Only mine. As the door clicked shut behind us, one thought echoed clearly in my mind. I hadn't run away. I had finally stepped somewhere my parents couldn't follow, but I had no idea yet how far they would go once they realized I was gone. The first 3 days in my new apartment felt unreal. Not exciting, not dramatic, just peaceful. The kind of peace you don't realize you've been missing until it suddenly appears. Every sound inside the apartment belonged to me. If a cabinet opened, it was because I opened it. If the floor creaked, it was because I walked across it. For the first time in my life, my space had a single owner, and it was me. The building itself helped reinforce that feeling. Every time I came through the lobby, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. The elevator wouldn't move without my key card. Even the hallways felt quiet and private. No random visitors wandering around. No strangers knocking on doors. Just residents living their lives. It felt like stepping into a different world. During those first few days, I did something unusual. I kept my phone on silent, face down on the kitchen counter. Part of me knew exactly what would happen once my family realized I was gone, and I wasn't ready for it yet. So I unpacked boxes, I arranged my furniture, I hung my string lights across the new living room window, and every evening I sat on the couch with a strange sense of calm, like my lungs had finally learned how to breathe properly. On the morning of the 4th day, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my phone and flipped it over. The screen lit up instantly, and my stomach dropped. 48 missed calls, more than 70 text messages, dozens of voicemails, my mother, my father, Ethan, numbers I didn't recognize. I stared at the notifications for a long time, then slowly opened the messages. They started mildly confused. Mom, Hannah, are you at work? Call me. Then, slightly concerned, Dad, your mother can't reach you. Please check in. Then frantic. Mom, Hannah, where are you? Your apartment is empty. Then angry. Ethan, did you seriously move without telling anyone? But the one that made me pause was from my mother, 2 hours earlier. It was a screenshot, a Facebook post. My heart sank as I read it. My daughter Hannah Brooks is missing. We haven't heard from her and her apartment is empty. If anyone has seen her, please contact us. Missing. The word felt surreal. I wasn't missing. I had simply moved. But to my parents, those two things apparently meant the same thing. My phone started ringing again. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something told me to answer. Hello? A calm voice spoke on the other end. Is this Hannah Brooks? Yes. This is Officer Daniel Ruiz with the Austin Police Department. Are you safe right now? My heart skipped. Yes, I said carefully. I'm fine. There was a brief pause. Your family filed a missing persons report this morning. Of course they did. They believed something may have happened to you, he continued. I rubbed my forehead. I moved apartments. Another pause. Then the officer said something that made my stomach tighten. Well, that explains part of the situation. Part of it? Yes. His tone shifted slightly. Your family was involved in an incident at your former apartment building earlier today. My grip tightened around the phone. What kind of incident? They attempted to enter the unit. My chest went cold. But someone else lives there now, he continued. The new tenants believed it was a a break-in and called the police. I closed my eyes. Of course they did, because my parents had never believed doors applied to them. Would you be able to come down to the station today to verify a few details? He asked. Yes, I said quietly. The station was only a 15-minute drive from my new building, but the entire way there, my mind replayed the words he had used. Break-in. Because that's exactly what it looked like from the outside. When I arrived, the fluorescent lights inside the building buzzed softly. A receptionist directed me toward a small conference room. My heart started pounding as I approached the door, because I already knew what I would see inside, and I was right. My mother sat at the table with tissues in her hands, mascara smeared across her cheeks. My father stood beside her with his arms crossed tightly. Ethan paced near the wall, looking irritated. The moment the door opened, all three of them looked up, and the room exploded. Hannah? My mother jumped to her feet. Oh my God, you're alive! She rushed toward me like she expected a dramatic reunion. But I didn't move. I stayed exactly where I was. I'm fine, I said calmly. Her expression shifted slightly, from relief to confusion. You disappeared, she said breathlessly. You emptied your apartment? Yes. Without telling anyone? I held her gaze. Yes. Behind me, Officer Ruiz stepped into the room. Let's all sit down, he said calmly. Everyone returned to their seats, except Ethan, who leaned against the wall looking annoyed. The officer turned toward me. Ms. Brooks, your family reported you missing earlier today. I know, he nodded. But that's not the main reason we're here? He glanced toward my parents. Your family attempted to force entry into your former residence. My mother gasped dramatically. That's not what happened. The officer raised an eyebrow. Witnesses reported someone climbing onto the balcony. Ethan shifted awkwardly. I slipped, he muttered. The officer ignored him and looked back at me. Do you currently live at that apartment? No. When did you move? 4 days ago. My mother's voice cracked. You moved without telling us. I nodded. Yes. The room went silent for a moment. Then Ethan scoffed. You're being ridiculous, Hannah. I turned toward him slowly. You've been hanging out in my apartment when I'm not home? He shrugged. Mom said it was fine. Of course she did. My father finally spoke. We thought something happened to you, he said firmly. You vanished. I moved, I replied. You stopped answering your phone. I took a breath. I wanted space. The word hung in the air like something foreign. My mother's eyes filled with fresh tears. We were worried sick. I looked at her quietly. You've been entering my apartment without permission for months. Her expression hardened slightly. We were helping. You read my work documents. I was curious. You gave Ethan a key. He's your brother. The officer cleared his throat gently. Ms. Your brother, Brooks, he said. Would you like to document these concerns formally? My mother's head snapped toward him. Document? Yes, he said calmly. Repeated unauthorized entry can be considered trespassing. My father leaned forward. Officer, this is our daughter, and she's an adult, the officer replied. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then my mother whispered something that would have once broken my heart. I miss when you needed us. But something inside me had changed. I still might, I said quietly. But not like this. The officer placed a sheet of paper on the table. A written boundary agreement might help prevent future misunderstandings. My parents stared at it like it was an insult, but I looked at it differently, like it was a door finally locking. Because this time, the rules would actually exist. The paper sitting in the middle of the table didn't look important. Just a standard form, plain white, black text. But the weight of it in that room felt enormous. Officer Ruiz slid it a few inches closer to my parents. This document simply records an agreement regarding personal boundaries, he explained calmly. My mother stared at it like it was something offensive. You want us to sign something? She asked, her voice trembling. The officer nodded. It clarifies expectations moving forward and helps prevent future incidents. My father leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. This is ridiculous, he muttered. But Officer Ruiz didn't react. Instead, he looked at me. Ms. Brooks, what boundaries would you like included? The question hung in the air. For most of my life, I had never been asked something like that. Not seriously. Not by someone who actually intended to enforce the answer. My mother was already shaking her head. Hannah, you can't be serious. I looked down at the paper, then slowly spoke. 3 things. The room went quiet. I could feel all 3 of them staring at me, but I kept my eyes on the form. 1, I said. You will not come to my new apartment. My mother inhaled sharply. You're banning us from your home? I'm protecting my space. My father scoffed. That's extreme. I continued anyway. 2. We only meet in public places. Ethan rolled his eyes. Oh my God. I ignored him. And 3. I finished. You do not access my personal belongings, my accounts, or my mail. Silence filled the room. The officer wrote each line down carefully. My mother looked like she had just been insulted. We are your parents, she said quietly. Yes, I replied, and I'm an adult. The words felt strangely powerful, like saying them out loud changed something fundamental. My father rubbed his temples. Hannah, we made mistakes. You broke into my apartment today. We thought you were in danger. You climbed onto someone else's balcony. Ethan shifted awkwardly again. That part wasn't planned, he muttered. Officer Ruiz cleared his throat. For the record, he said calmly, the tenants inside that unit believed a burglary was occurring. My mother's voice rose slightly. We were trying to help our daughter. You were entering someone else's home without permission, the officer replied. The room fell silent again. For the first time since I walked in, my parents looked unsure, because this wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a legal conversation. My mother turned back toward me. You really want the police involved in this? I held her gaze. You involved them. Her mouth opened, then closed, because she knew I was right. She had reported me missing. She had tried to force entry into my old apartment. She had created this situation. The officer slid the paper back toward the center of the table. If everyone agrees to these terms, he said, signing this document confirms mutual understanding. My father stared at it for a long moment, then finally picked up the pen. Hannah, he said quietly, this isn't how families are supposed to work. Maybe he was right, but I had spent 30 years living inside their version of family, and it had never left room for me. Maybe not, I said softly, but it's how this one will. He signed the paper. My mother watched him in disbelief. You're actually agreeing to this, she whispered. He sighed. What's the alternative? She looked at the officer, then at me, then slowly reached for the pen. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed. Ethan was last. He grabbed the pen with obvious annoyance. This is so dramatic, he muttered as he scribbled his name. The officer collected the form once all 3 signatures were there. Thank you, he said. Then he turned toward my parents. I want to make something very clear. His voice stayed calm, but the message was unmistakable. If any of these boundaries are violated again, future incidents may be treated as trespassing. My mother's face turned pale. Trespassing? Yes. She's our daughter, and this is her residence, he replied evenly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother whispered something that sounded almost broken. I miss when you needed us. The words might have crushed me once, but now they just sounded sad, because needing someone and being controlled by them were 2 very different things. I might still need you sometimes, I said gently, but that doesn't mean you own my life. Tears filled her eyes again. My father stood up slowly. Are we done here? The officer nodded. Yes. My parents moved toward the door. Ethan followed. But before leaving, my mother turned back toward me one last time. You didn't even tell us where you moved. I shook my head. No. Her lips pressed together tightly. For the first time in my life, she looked like she had realized something important. She didn't know everything about me anymore, and she couldn't force her way into knowing. They left the room quietly. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence afterward felt enormous. Officer Ruiz looked at me. You handled that well. I exhaled slowly. I didn't feel like I did. Setting boundaries rarely feels comfortable, he said, but it's necessary. I nodded. For the first time in hours, the tension in my chest began to loosen, because something had shifted today. Not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. For the first time in my life, my parents had been forced to hear the word no, and this time, it actually meant something. The strangest part of the whole situation wasn't the police station. It wasn't the break-in attempt. It wasn't even the moment my parents signed the agreement. The strangest part was what came after. Silence. For the first time in my adult life, my phone stopped lighting up constantly with my mother's name. No sudden just checking in texts. No missed calls stacked on top of each other. No unexpected visits. The quiet felt unfamiliar at first, like moving into a house where the air pressure had suddenly changed. For the first few days after the police station, I kept expecting something to happen. A dramatic confrontation. A flood of angry messages. Some emotional explosion about betrayal. But nothing came. And that silence allowed something new to grow inside my life. Routine. Real routine. The kind that belongs entirely to you. Mornings in my new apartment started gently. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting soft light across the hardwood floor. I would make coffee in the small kitchen. Sometimes I left the mug on the counter overnight. Sometimes Sometimes I forgot to make my bed. Little imperfections that used to bother my mother deeply. But here, they simply existed, and no one corrected them. After work, I would walk along the trail near the river. Austin evenings had a warm, golden glow that made everything feel slower, peaceful. And every time I returned to my building, something small reminded me how different life had become. The locked front doors, the elevator that only moved when my keycard touched the sensor, the quiet hallway where every apartment door stayed closed unless the resident inside chose to open it. Privacy wasn't a privilege here, it was normal. About 3 weeks after the police station, my mother finally called. Not repeatedly, just once. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hello? Her voice sounded careful. Different. Hannah, hi. Hi. There was a short pause. I was wondering if you might want to meet for lunch. The request surprised me because it was exactly what the agreement required. A public place. A neutral space. No apartment visits, no surprise appearances, just a simple meeting. Okay, I said. We chose a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, both of my parents were already there. My mother sat stiffly at the table, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. My father looked tired. Ethan wasn't with them. The moment they saw me, something passed across their faces. Relief, but also hesitation, like they weren't sure what version of me they were about to meet. I sat down. For a few minutes, we talked about normal things. Work, weather, traffic. The conversation felt strangely polite. Then my mother cleared her throat. The apartment building you moved into, she said carefully. Is it nice? The question was simple, but it meant something important. She didn't ask where it was. She didn't push for details. She respected the boundary. Yes, I said. It's really nice. She nodded slowly. I'm glad you're safe. For the first time, the words didn't feel like control. They felt genuine. My father leaned forward slightly. We never meant to make you feel invaded. I considered that sentence for a moment, then answered honestly, I know. Because deep down, I believed that part. My parents hadn't been trying to hurt me. They had simply never learned where their authority ended and where my independence began. Ethan joined us at the next meeting a few weeks later. He looked uncomfortable. I didn't realize it bothered you that much, he admitted at one point. You were using my apartment like a hangout spot, I said. He shrugged awkwardly. Mom said it was fine. That was the truth. The system in our family had always worked that way. Mom made decisions. Everyone else assumed they were normal. But now the system had changed, and slowly everyone was adjusting. We never talked about the police station again, but its presence lingered quietly behind every interaction, not as a threat, as a reminder. A line had been drawn, and this time it stayed in place. Months passed. Life settled into something steady. My parents still existed in my life, but in a different way, a healthier distance. We met occasionally for dinner, sometimes lunch, always public places, always planned. And every time I returned home afterward, I unlocked my apartment door with the same quiet sense of relief, because the space waiting on the other side belonged completely to me. No rearranged cabinets, no surprise visitors, no invisible audience watching how I live, just silence and freedom. One evening, nearly a year after everything happened, I stood on my balcony watching the sunset over the city. The air was warm. The streets below were busy with people heading to restaurants and concerts. Normal life. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A message from my mother. Just 2 sentences. Hope you're having a good evening. Love you. I smiled slightly. Because that message felt different from the ones she used to send. It didn't ask where I was. It didn't demand a response. It didn't carry guilt. It simply existed. And that was enough. Sometimes people assume that setting boundaries destroys families. But that isn't always true. Sometimes it simply forces everyone to rebuild the relationship in a healthier way. Looking back now, moving without telling them wasn't an act of rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was survival. The moment I stopped letting people cross the lines that protected my life. And if there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's something I wish someone had told me years earlier. You're allowed to protect your peace, even from people who love you, especially from people who love you. Because love without boundaries isn't protection, it's control. And the day you finally recognize the difference might be the day your real life begins.